Hey there, everybody. Alec Chrisman here, your relevant, or now that this is getting shared outside of just my students, maybe your irrelevant TA for POLI 231, Intro to Political Theory. With my students, I ran a little poll asking them which is the thinker they most needed to review. And I was originally going to do the top two, but then Professor VMF pointed out when he used the same poll for the final class session that Hume and Burke made up about a quarter of the total respondents. So I'm going to do a video on Plato, Myth of the Metals, which is the one you're watching. I want to do a video on Weber, which will be linked in the same email, and a video on Hume and Burke, which will also be linked in the same email, and are all going on the massive links document. I'm going to be going through these. The most important thing to understand about how to use this video is that this video is meant if you have looked at or are dealing with Hume and Burke, are dealing with Plato's Myth of the Metals, are dealing with Weber, and are confused by what they're saying. I want to offer, after you've used your resources, another way of understanding, another person taking another crack at them that hopefully helps open up what they're saying for you. This doesn't mean you can't use this video before you go and reread them. I think it's a good idea, actually, because this will give you an idea of maybe what to be looking for when you go back and reread the text. However, these videos are not exhaustive. They do not contain everything you need to know. This video will not contain everything you need to know about Plato's Myth of the Metals in order to do well on the exam. That's not what it's for. This can be used as a way to give you directions when you go to read. This video should be used as a way to amplify your understanding of the reading. This video cannot take the place of you reviewing the reading and of making sure you know what you're talking about for the final. So understand that, and this video can be a useful tool. Try to use it as a substitute for your studying, and things aren't going to go well for you. So let's start. Plato's Myth of the Metals. This was easily, and led throughout the entire time of the poll, the one that people said they needed to review the most. And it's really interesting because I think I might know, other than just the fact that it's a long dialogue, why people were so confused by that. I think they were confused by it because it's not so clear. Like, normally the way that this unit is taught in the course is under the broad idea of the dirty hands theory. The idea that sometimes in politics you have to do bad things. What bad things should you be able to do in politics, right? That's a pretty obvious understanding of it, a way to approach it. The way Professor VMF structured it this time around is we mostly dealt with just war. We dealt with just war in Thucydides, in Augustine, in Aquinas, and kind of in Machiavelli, depending on how you read him. So you had all these just war arguments in front of you. Is just war even possible? What does it look like? And then you had kind of this one reading over here that focused on, is deception in government acceptable, and what kind of deception is it? So understand, for the first reason, that's kind of the question that the Myth of the Metals section of Plato is supposed to try to answer. What kinds of lies does good governance require lying to the populace? Does it require the leaders to lie to themselves? That's another really important thing. The guardians are expected to believe the myth after a generation or two. Plato thinks the society would be more stable if the guardians too think that their position in society is naturalized, that they are not free to go about and start rigging the system in their favor, that they must, for the sake of a well-ordered society. And remember, a well-ordered society in Plato is a precondition for individual virtue. You need to know what your station is in order to know how to be good in that station. How to be a good person requires that station. So you need a well-ordered society in, and again, remember the city-soul analogy, the city-body metaphor, in the same way that the brain should be doing the commanding, but the brain is bad at lifting objects. The arms are good at lifting objects. And the arms are good at lifting objects, but they need fuel to lift the objects, and the gut is good at providing the fuel. It's the same way. The guardians order people and organize things and get things ordered the way they need to be and identify who is good at what and who should be educated with what and raise all the children in common, right? The auxiliaries are the ones that go out and fight and defend the city and conquer new territory and do everything they need to do, but they need the guardians to guide them, tell them where to strike, where to fight, when maybe they're getting too enthusiastic, wanting to conquer too much territory. And the gut needs to provide food. The people, the workers, need to provide goods for everybody else to live. But the workers, the merchants, they're just going to consume and consume and consume unless somebody tells them when to consume, what to consume, where things need to be allocated, so on and so forth. This order is what you need for virtue to exist. And we talk about Plato's version of virtue. I'm dealing with the second reading we did on Plato. The third reading we did on Plato deals more with his conception of virtue, but this makes a lot more sense in that context. That order is a precondition for virtue, so it's very important that we maintain that order. And that's why you have the myth of the metals. That's why you need to give everyone a reason to stay in their spot, to do what they're supposed to do. And you can argue for this in a couple of different ways. You can argue for it in a prudential way, which is, maybe the people that are doing janitorial work in the ideal city, maybe their individual lives would be better off if they were allowed to rise above their station and be a glorious soldier in the auxiliaries or join the guardian class, right? Though again, remember, the guardian class isn't exactly fun for Plato. It seems like kind of an ascetic lifestyle where you're banned from owning private property, and, it's unclear whether you're allowed to have sex. If you do, your children are immediately taken from you. That's true for everyone. But, it's a very it's not like they're living on top of the heap, eating grapes and drinking wine and having honeyed bread that they dip in. It's not high Roman decadence, right? It's a very kind of pursuit of truth, ascetic lifestyle, almost monastic is the way I understand him reading the Guardian. So don't think that it's super fun to be at the top of Plato's hierarchy either. The people at the top of the hierarchy are also doing their job. But point being, maybe it's better for an individual janitorial worker in the ideal state, in the city built in speech. Maybe it would be better for them if they could be a guardian, or if they could be an auxiliary. But we need people to do janitorial work. We need people to go out there and clean up the garbage that people leave around, right? And this isn't a particularly fun job, so you gotta give them some reason to do it. You got to give them some reason why this is what they were born to do. And that's not just for the benefit of everyone in society, and this is where it depends on how much you read Plato's natural aptitude elements. In the early parts of the book, when he talks about education in in book 3, he talks about education in terms of how it structures the individual and builds them in a very kind of, there's a little bit of natural talent maybe identified, but it's mostly about creating the sort of person you want. Very like Brave New World. In later books, Plato starts talking much more as though innate talent is a hard cap on what certain people can do. But even if we just take the softer version, when you look at that, if there are certain roles that people are accustomed to doing, if there are certain roles that if this person would be a good janitor, but they wouldn't be a good auxiliary, that's one of the things that the guardians are meant to identify. And a person who's a good janitor, but thinks they could be a real badass warrior if they wanted to be, right? If they're wrong about that, letting them try to be a warrior is going to be bad for them and bad for the city as a whole. You don't want to do that. So you want a reason for them to stay doing the thing they're going to be good at doing the thing they're going to be most useful at doing. This is the way to understand it. And a lot of people, when they look at this story, they went, you know what, if a lie needs to be told, it's kind of this very, very sort of virtuous, very enlightenment, maybe very Lockean kind of attitude among a lot of the students, which was, if a system needs a lie to be perpetuated, then the system has no right to exist in the first place. Nothing that's good should need to be supported by lies. And that's an understandable moral impulse, but if I'm talking from Plato's perspective right now, think about it. Is there really nothing? Look at all the people out there. Look at all the mistakes they make. Look at all the false stuff they believe when left up to their own devices. And I'm not talking about any particular group here. No matter what your political ideology is, because each political ideology is only a small subset of the population, right? You look out around at the rest of the world, and no matter what your political ideology is, most people are wrong. Most people believe things that you think probably aren't just mistaken, but are probably deeply morally confused, if not evil, right? So look at that mindset and think, is there really no falsehood that I would want to get everyone to believe to keep them focused on the greater truth? The greater truth that the myth of the metals is meant to point to is that you need people doing different things for an orderly society to work. You need people doing the things that they are good at and being content where they are if society is going to function well. That's what you need, Plato thinks. And so it's permissible to lie to those people, to get them to believe a falsehood, if it will wind up angling them towards, making them hold to the greater truth. What about a phrase like, all people are created equal? We read from Williams, like, on certain definitions of that phrase, it can't be true, right? People are born with different capacities. People are born with different abilities. Some people can just do more in their lives, right? So why do we teach every child in our Western liberal democracies that all people are created equal, when on the bare meaning of that sentence, that's not true? Well, maybe because it's pointing them at a greater truth that might be a bit hard, especially if they don't have a lot of capacities, a greater truth that might be a bit hard for them to understand. A truth like, everybody is deserving of equal moral consideration, maybe in the way Rawls talks about. Maybe we have our own myths. And one of the ways to gain a little more sympathy for Plato, I think, is to look deep in your heart, look through your beliefs, look at how broken and screwed up you think the world is. Again, no matter what your ideology, you probably think the world's broken and screwed up in a couple of ways. And think, what can I do? What would I be willing to lie about in order to get people to realize some of the deeper truths that I think are morally necessary for a society to work? You might not agree then. If you can come up with an answer to that, this thing you'd be willing to lie for, the thing you'd be willing to tell a myth about. If you can think of that, and I think if you're honest, you could find something, then you don't actually disagree with Plato's approach. You just disagree with what he thinks is worth lying about. You've got your own myths that you might want to tell. Think about that when reevaluating Plato, and I think it'll make some of the most obvious objections to his point seem not as important, and make the salience of his point to modern society, even a modern liberal society that praises itself on tolerance and openness and transparency, right? No matter how much we live up to it. Maybe that'll help you understand a bit more where he's coming from. I hope anyway.